Welcome, everyone. I am here with Ryan McBeth, and we are going to talk about a topic I haven't talked about in about 2 months or so, but it's a perennial favorite, I guess. Again, it's a pretty depressing topic, but we're going to talk about the Russia-Ukraine war and go through updates and things like that. So, Ryan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate it.
So the first question is why on earth are you appearing on my show, given the size of your YouTube channel?
You asked and I said yes. What's funny is that I really want to get this video about General Shinseki out like today. I'd like to get this video out today. So this is holding me up from actually getting content out to my subscribers. So I hope you appreciate it.
Oh, I hope your subscribers don't come to my account and start attacking me for making a video late. By the way, I have a General Shinseki story.
Oh, really? I'd love to hear that.
And then I want to hear.
Know who that is before we go? Or
yes, so he was the chief of staff of the army just prior to the Iraq invasion, and when he testified before Congress, they asked how many troops he would need, and he said on the order of several 100,000, which, for those like you who served in Iraq, know that was probably an accurate statement.
Could you give us some ideas to the magnitude of the Army's force requirement for an occupation of Iraq following a successful completion of the war?
In specific numbers, I would have to rely on combatant commanders' exact requirements, but I think...
How about a range?
I would say that what's been mobilized to this point, something on the order of several 100,000 soldiers are probably a figure that would be required. We're talking about post-hostilities, control over a piece of geography that's fairly significant with the kinds of ethnic tensions that could lead to other problems, and so it takes a significant ground force presence to maintain a safe and secure environment, to ensure that people are fed, that water is distributed, all the normal responsibilities that go along with administering a situation like this.
Now, did you need that many troops to kick in the door and overthrow the regime? No, you did it just fine with the number of troops we had. However, to stabilize the country, the massive goat rope afterward is a direct result of not having enough bodies on the ground. Because I think the Rand Corporation did a study. I think it was you need 25 to 1 for every person in that country. I mean, the Russians are dealing with that issue right now. I think they wanted to do the exact same thing that we did with the Thunder Run in Iraq and Baghdad and all that stuff. And they had limited aims. They just wanted to overthrow the Kyiv regime and then call it a day and move back. It turns out that they probably needed 800,000 troops to go in there. But anyway, General Shinseki story. Sorry. You haven't even had a chance to talk. I haven't even had a chance. Okay. So Shinseki story. All right, so my apologies. It's going to sound a little pretentious. So I went to a certain school, and one side was on Boston, one was in Cambridge. Okay, so General Shinseki was at the Kennedy School of Government. He invited all the ROTC students and veterans at the various graduate schools to have breakfast with him. Uh-huh. So we all sat down and had breakfast, and I told him that I had been at the National Training Center, and we talked about that because he was also a tanker like I was. And it was a good, positive story. I forget how it came up, but he's just like, are you all familiar with von Manstein's matrix? And I'm like, no, what is that? Are you familiar with it?
No, that's a new one.
You'll appreciate it because...
I don't think you're just making stuff up, but all right.
No. I could go on.
Whatever you say, sir. Yes, absolutely, sir.
Well, so there was a German general, von Manstein, who also, by the way, led the German campaign to capture the Crimea in World War II. Okay. But he was a very capable general. He was also the general who planned the attack on the Kursk salient, which most people don't know about Kursk, even though that was probably the most decisive battle in World War II. It wasn't really Stalingrad. It was that particular battle that really destroyed the German combat power. So he had this theory. He said that there are 4 types of officers. You'll appreciate this.
Okay.
If you have a matrix, okay, on the top, you have industriousness, right? So lazy or industrious. And then on the vertical axis, you have smart or stupid. Okay. Now, the officers who are smart and industrious, those are your staff officers. They'll ensure that no problem is left untouched. Okay. The smart but lazy, those are your general officers, because they'll do the very bare minimum to ensure that the job gets done.
Yeah.
The officers who are lazy and stupid, leave them alone. They're harmless. The officers that are industrious and stupid, you need to cull them out of the military as soon as possible, because they will do the maximum damage that you could possibly imagine. So that's from Manstein's Matrix. So Shinseki, your video will probably come out before this one, but what's that going to be about?
So it's a couple of days ago, I talked about the striker, and I called Shinseki. For people who are completely ignorant about military vehicles, what's the striker? The striker is an 8-wheeled armored personnel carrier, or in some cases an IVF, an infantry fighting vehicle. And these were just donated to Ukraine. And General Shinseki pioneered this idea of the striker. He called it the IAV, the interim armored vehicle, after Bosnia, when he was going, you know what? The world is changing. We need to have some kind of light vehicle that could deal with all these brush fire wars and self-deploy. And that eventually turned into the striker, which is a pretty good vehicle today. So he had a brilliant idea and ultimately was taken down by a not so great idea of making us all wear a silly hat.
The Black Berets. The Black Berets. I remember that. The Ranger Regiment was not very happy about that.
Maybe I remember it differently, but it seemed like it wasn't the Ranger Regiment. The Ranger Regiment was like, okay, we'll just wear tan, and they went back into the woods to do Ranger things. It was everybody else who was upset, and maybe retired Ranger bros as well, because I remember one guy who walked all the way from like Texas to the White House. I think he called it there was an internet site and all that. It was like the Great Presidential Ruck, and he was going to walk all the way to the White House to give President Bush his black beret, and he got to and he was asking to stay at people's houses and stuff. So he rucked all the way from Texas to the White House, and Bush wasn't home. I don't know how that story ended, but I don't want to call ahead.
Those were wonderful days when that was the only controversy that we have. Now government's monitoring Twitter feeds and restricting people's First Amendment rights. But anyway, I won't add anything to that. Okay. Russia, Ukraine. So in November, General Milley mentioned that he thought the total number of combined casualties were around 200,000 spread between the two. The Russians, it's pretty clear how they're faring because a lot of this stuff is made public. But what about the Ukrainians? The Ukrainians are very tight on OPSEC. Sorry for the audience, operational security. So they never report what their casualties are. What's your view on the status of their
So it's probably about 1/3-ish of the Russian numbers. And that's not necessarily because Ukraine has better medical care or because whatever. It's mainly because, for the most part, Ukraine has been on the defense. And defense is easier than offense. People have argued with me about it, and I'm like, dude, it's in the freaking book. There was another YouTuber who made fun of me about, Ryan's wrong. I'm like, dude, I publish all my freaking,
What was their argument? I mean, it's standard 3-to-1 odds that you're supposed to, the attacker against the defender, it's like 3-to-1. If it's an entrenched defender, it's higher.
Attackers always lose. Oh my God, what was it, 3% a day? I have to look up that figure again. So I think attackers lose 6% a day, defenders lose 3% a day. That's just the way the math works. It might not necessarily be killed. It could be injured, but attackers lose a certain percentage, defenders lose a certain percentage, and that's just the way it works. Now, you could have things reversed. When I can tell you this, when Ukraine starts counterattacking, you're going to see those numbers flipped. And that is nothing, no reflection of their combat ability. It's just you are moving out in the open against static defenses. If the people there stand and fight, you're going to see further casualties. And there are people who said my theory or the numbers I threw out was wrong, because look at Iraq, during the initial invasion. Like, well, yeah, no, I won't say nobody fought, but nobody fought. Like, Iraqi defenses just collapsed. There were some brave Iraqis who fought, at least in the Operation Iraqi Freedom. But for the most part, Iraqis just melted away. There were not the huge number of surrenders that we saw in the first Gulf War in Operation Desert Storm. But for the most part, if you're doing an attack, it's 6% per day on the attacker side, 3% per day on the defender side. For the most part, for the last couple of months, Ukraine has been defending, except for a couple of very specific and actually pretty shocking offenses. Especially in the Northeast. That blew my mind that they were able to move so far so fast in just a couple of days.
What, in the initial invasion or?
No, when Ukraine counterattacked across the Oskil River, they took a lot of land back really quickly. And Russia has been trying to take this one town. They finally succeeded. They've been trying to take this one town for like a month.
Is this Soledar?
No, I'm going to pronounce, every time I pronounce words, it's, I want to say
Bakhmut.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I can't
Soledar.
Even speak English. So I'm from New Jersey, man. Like, I start saying words.
That's all right. It could be worse. You could be from Delaware like me. So I think Soledar was the town that Wagner is fighting over. Huh. And that was the gateway, or one of the key towns they need to capture Bakhmut. And then there's also all the political intrigue right now with the Soloviki, right? So you have the head of Wagner who's claiming that they control Soledar. Meanwhile, they just fired the latest general who was in charge. First, it was Dvornikov. Now it was, I can't remember. It begins with an S. I'm going to
pronounce it wrong. It starts with an S. He did one of the hardest things that you can ever do, and that
but it was smart.
He moved his forces over the Dnieper River, so he did a river crossing and passage of lines. Two of the hardest things any army can do, he was able to do successfully. The only thing I can think of is that maybe he was just getting too much power, or his troops like him too much, and President Putin doesn't like that, and you're out of here. Or maybe you don't get rewarded for a retreat, But he was able to save a significant number of his forces by doing a river crossing and then passage of lines, and that's not easy to do.
Yeah,
so I don't think one competent guy.
Again, I'm not trying to take sides at all on this. I'm just trying to be, as you said before the call, you try to do is try to be objective, because look, the Russians are putting out propaganda, but we're putting out propaganda too, right? So it's not as one-sided, I don't think, and by we, I don't mean you and I mean what our news sources are saying. But I think what you're seeing is, in this particular case, the other thing I think he did, it's ruthless, but it was the correct strategy. We would do it, but we would do it at the very beginning with our Air Force, was that he was systematically targeting Ukrainian utilities and things like that. Yeah, like that. That's exactly what you do to shut down your enemy. I think he probably got pushed out because I don't think it's for the retreat. I think in order to do something like that, he would have had to get clearance, right? You don't do something like that in the Russian army without clearance, because, you'll get shot. Yeah. I think what happened was he just lost momentum. Like, they weren't continuing to push forward. At the same time, you had the Wagner guy. Yevgeny Prigozhin is playing this political game. The person who astonishes me that he's still around is Shoigu.
Mhm.
He is the most incompetent manager in all of Russia, but he's the most crafty politician I've ever seen.
It could be like Rumsfeld in the sense of, you know, he doesn't have any political ambitions and he's not a threat. And once in a while, maybe he makes an okay decision. So why not keep him around? Because God, if you've got someone competent in there, you know, that could be a threat. There's a book, I think it was called How to Be a Dictator. It was actually a pretty darn good book.
Well, there's a show on Netflix too. It's by
How to Be a Dictator.
Peter
Dinklage. It was
Dinklage.
called The Dictator's Handbook or something like that. But yeah, one of the things is you have to satisfy 3 criteria or 3 people. You have to satisfy the army, you have to satisfy the police, and then you have to satisfy your elite, you know, the people in power. I mean, I would assume as long as money and privileges keep getting funneled to the people in power in Russia, then President Putin's in an okay place. The second people who are in positions of power don't get their checks, then they start thinking about, like, how can we change the situation so that we can start getting that money flowing again? I guess that's occasionally why you have purges, right? That's why you kick people out, because you don't want someone getting ideas in their head that they can. I guess this was in the book too. Might not be a bad idea to once in a while just purge anybody, you know, just to keep.
Yeah, just random people to keep.
Just randomly purge someone who's elite, just because. So
Jurassic.
Yeah, go on.
Go ahead.
Probably one of the better movies to watch, and you can find it on Amazon Prime. You know, pay the $4 for the rental. It's called The Death of Stalin. And
I've seen that. Yeah.
I mean, brilliant freaking movie. And everyone speaks English in it. No one tries the Russian accent. They just speak their normal English accents, which actually kind of reflect the diversity of Russia's accents in a way as well. That was so brilliant, that movie, when everyone's plotting against each other, you know, trying to figure out how they're going to get on top. And everybody's watching each other. Just, I can't even imagine a life like that, you know.
Work in corporate and you'll get a good idea.
I don't know. I do work in a corporate world, and I love my job. And I think the reason I've been successful in my corporate life is the same reason why I was successful in the military. And that's, for some reason, everybody likes me. I could never figure that out. Why do people like me? But I've always said, oh, Ryan, he's a good guy. And I've coasted I was the most mediocre soldier and NCO. But it was one of those things where I could run too. At least I used to be able to run. Like now I still run. I'm a lot slower, but I was that guy. I could run and everybody liked me. And now, you know, just by being in the military, you know, I was that guy where, like, you know, hell, we need to pick up the vehicles. Oh, send Ryan. And I would bring a box of donuts and, like, hey, Master Sergeant, hey, you got those vehicles ready? Like, hey, I brought you some donuts. Oh, thank you, Sergeant. Yeah. I'll help you out. Hey, you got a chalk block I can have? Because I think we lost one of our. Oh, yeah, I'll hook you up, Sergeant. That was my whole career. I was not that good of an NCO, but for some reason, everybody liked me. I lost out on a mission because of that. My company commander, they were doing some kind of PSD mission, you know, and I was like, can I get on that mission? And we were going to go to, like, Blackwater and get trained at Blackwater in defensive driving. And my commander, he actually sat me down and said, you're not being picked for this mission. And I was like, why? And he said, well, because we need leadership, not likership.
We need leadership, not what?
Leadership, not likership. So I got by my whole career because everybody liked me, but I guess he was afraid I wouldn't be able to make tough decisions because I wanted people to like me, and everyone did like me.
Yeah, I'm like the opposite guy. Like, it's just like there's a raging inferno. People are on fire. There's like 7 people throwing gasoline onto it. We need somebody to fix it. Sean, do it. And then I just go in there. The military was more standardized, but usually when there's a crisis, particularly when former, like, military officers are out in corporate, we're used to dealing with chaos. So when there's chaos, they throw us in. But you don't make any friends when you're just making decisions and you're making the right decisions, but everybody's just like, why can't I hire 15,000 people? Well, because we'll go bankrupt at 5,000 people. Like, and you laugh, but that's a real example.
Yeah.
So I'm just like the hammer, and people don't like the hammer.
So you were an officer.
Yeah. Did you think? You thought I was enlisted? Look, see, I've been working in corporate. I'm a chameleon. See.
That was never my jam. All I wanted to do through my whole career, I never wanted to be airborne ranger, space shuttle door gunner. I just wanted to shoot toes and be with my guys and do cool stuff and like not have that much responsibility, you know? Like that was, I gotta tell you, squad leader was an okay, right? Like best rank was team leader or section sergeant. Because you get just enough responsibility that people take you seriously, you know, but not so much responsibility that you're signing for everything, you know, and that was a great freaking life, you know, because you only had to worry about you. You're single, you know, you live in the barracks and you didn't have a lot of concerns in your life. You know, you're not worried about, oh, am I going to make rent? I mean, you have to worry about your car payment, your internet bill, car insurance. That's pretty much it. The rest you just bank, right? And I'm not like an officer where it's like, oh, I got to go down and do weapons count. I got to do a serial number count, you know, like it's a great freaking life.
Yeah, there are things I loved about it. Like, well, probably at the time I didn't love it, but now that I think back to it, because I was at the NTC the whole time. I was never deployed. So I was Op 4 and man, that was fun. It was great. It was great. Yeah. I remember sitting in Germany, like, hey, let's start a fire. That way the Blue 4 can see us and we'll get killed so we can go back and get warm. You know? We would do things like, let's put a 6-pack of Coca-Cola in the middle of the road and set up an ambush on the sides so that Private Snuffy stops his Bradley and then we just kill him. We would do stuff like that all the time. I mean, we would do all sorts of deception stuff. I was the master of it. I loved it. We would buy those blue paper plates, these blue like paper bowls at Walmart that you can get. You know what they look like, right? Landmines. So we would buy those, put rocks on them, and set them out in regular patterns. And then we would set up ambushes on the side. So we would have fake minefields. Yeah. You put engineer tape across the road, and people would stop. And then we would use the platoon. That's actually in the book. To have fake minefields. You can. Yeah. I'm actually doing a video about landmines right now. I just finished the script. I'm going to start shooting the video once I'm done my Shinseki video. And one of the things you can do is you can do a phony minefield where, you dig up a little bit of dirt. Now, it only works if your adversary has become mine aware. So if your adversary if they've already hit mines, then it'll work. If they haven't already hit mines, it won't work. But you can take a dish plate, spray paint it, put that dish plate down on the road. It would stop me. Well, you have to stop. You have to stop. Now you might. Yeah, the first thing you should do, like right before you stop, is like, all right, where are they? Yeah, where are they?
0, 5, and 25. For your audience who doesn't know, if you ever stop your vehicle, one of the first things you do is you look out 0 meters, look out 5 meters, and look out 25 meters. Make sure you're not stopping on top of a roadside bomb. Yeah, I very fortunately did not have to confront that challenge. That's a bonus. That's a huge bonus. You realize it's the same retirement, right? Like whether you've been deployed or not, you don't get a bonus if you deploy to combat. Yeah, but you deserve more respect and honor for the crap that you had to go through. Like I just got to play Russian for 4 years, whatever. So I smoked cigarettes in a Humvee. That's pretty much it. I'll be smoking right now if my apartment would allow it. It's one of the, I used to have a house in New Jersey. I retired in 2014. I bought a house. It's like a 1,200 square foot ranch.
Well, first of all, why are you're not living in New Jersey?
No, I live in Maryland now. I moved down to Maryland because I got a job at a hedge fund as a manager of software engineers there. And now I work for a defense contractor doing work where it's called ISR, where we find the bad guys. And then the Army can decide what to do with the bad guys once we figure out where the bad guys are. So
it's not Palantir, is it?
No, I don't. I mean, people can go to my LinkedIn. I don't hide who I work for, but
but you shouldn't. You shouldn't talk about it.
It's and work knows what I do.
Yeah.
Palantir, no, I don't work. They're doing some interesting stuff. What's kind of neat where technology is now. I mean, one of my visions for the future is what I see tanks turning into infantry fighting vehicles with maybe an accompanying semi-autonomous vehicle that has a long high-velocity gun. We can identify vehicles right now. Like, that's trivial. To have the computing power to identify, you can put that on a server. That's easy. You can do software today where you can say, just find me white trucks. And software can scan an area and just send you a notification when they see a white truck. Not a white car, not a white SUV, not a white van, white truck. So when you think about it, having some kind of semi-autonomous vehicle, a tank, that has software loaded on it that knows what adversary vehicles look like on thermal and on regular daylight, that certainly adds an advantage, because if you have it in some kind of semi-autonomous mode, it can identify those targets and can send those targets to an operator for the operator to decide whether to service those targets or not. And it's probably more accurate than an operator too.
How do you handle deception turrets? Like fiberglass turrets that are shaped exactly like
the same way you would handle it if you're a regular operator. You make mistakes. I've talked to people about using robotics to engage targets before, and one of the arguments is, what if the robot makes a mistake? What if the human makes a mistake? At least the robot can see in multiple spectrums, right?
Yeah.
So if you
I think that's the answer, right?
Yeah.
It's just
So one of the things, like missiles, those Stinger missiles actually work in two spectrums, IR and ultraviolet. So not only are you going after the engine on IR, you're also looking at the ultraviolet shadow of the plane. And a flare that someone pops out looks totally different. So older missiles might be confused by a flare, but more modern missiles, when they're using two different spectrums, using IR and ultraviolet, they go, oh, wait, that flare doesn't look like what I was going after before. So I'm going to keep going after this thing. So if you have a tank or a semi-autonomous vehicle with a long gun, and this semi-autonomous vehicle is constantly looking for targets, constantly looking for threats, and multiple spectrums, thermal, IR, ultraviolet, and regular daylight, right? If it's looking for threats in 4 freaking spectrums, that's 3 more spectrums than a human can look. It might be able to go, well, on thermal, that looks like a T-72, but on ultraviolet, it's really just a BMP with a Vismod. Maybe throw that as an error, let the human decide what they want me to do. So
now here's another. Yeah, by the way, I'm thinking like a Op4 guy now. So what if that vehicle is hiding in a school?
School's a valid target. Are there kids in the school? No, there is not. Look at the darn Geneva Convention Law of War. There is nothing that says a school isn't a target. Nothing. A school is just a building. If there's kids in it, yeah, don't do that. There's nothing wrong with parking a tank in a school. Nothing wrong
with kids in it?
That's one of the things that I talk about with disinformation. People say, look, the Ukrainians they're feeding people in this school. It's a building, man. If there's kids in it, yeah, that's a problem. Maybe don't do that. It's just a building. That's it. So, all right. So they park it in the school. Well, that's why you have a semi-autonomous mode, where now you have a human that's in the loop that can say, oh, wait, or you can do GPS geofencing, where you say, hey, anything that's inside this geofence, don't target.
Yeah.
You do that. We do that now. Patriot missiles do that now, where you can say, hey, anything here, don't fire at anything inside this sector. We had that in the 80s. That's easy. So we had robots. If you look at the Aegis system, naval warfare happens so fast that you can't have a human in the loop. And when you turn on the Aegis system and say, go at it, boys, those missiles are coming out and the phalanx is firing, and there's no human in the loop on that. They're just like, all right, well, you can think a lot faster than me. We've had killer robots since the 80s with the Aegis system. We're just moving them on the land. That's all. Maybe the consequences at sea are a little bit different because there's no school bus at sea.
Yeah, there's nothing out there. Right.
Nothing out there. Now, I'm sure you're going to get a bunch of Navy guys going, well, technically, the humpback spotted whale is... Man, there's nothing out there. Like, I'm surprised these ships don't carry around dirt so that way you can, like, dig a little foxhole. They seem really unprotected.
Yeah, that is true. All right, back to Russia, Ukraine. Okay, so Gerasimov, I think, is now... some in the media are spinning it like it's a demotion. But remember when they did that to Petraeus? Obama sent him over to run Afghanistan after he was in charge of something else, but it wasn't really a demotion. It was kind of like, we have a raging fire, we need somebody to go and fix it. I think that's kind of what this is, but I don't know.
I don't know either. That's just a good question. I don't remember Petraeus being, I know what he did later. That was an issue. But I don't remember Petraeus being humiliated like that.
But it wasn't a humiliation. I'm trying to remember exactly how it happened. Maybe it was Ash Carter was telling the story. But Obama wanted somebody to go fix. It was like a presidential thing. Like Obama wanted him by name. And people in the military were like, you realize that's effectively a demotion, right? And it's just like, look, I just need somebody who can fix this. So it wasn't intended as a demotion. It was just where he was in his career. Going and like leading the Afghan mission was not.
Well, he wrote the book on coin. He literally wrote the book on coin.
That's why I think Obama chose him, right? Because he was the right guy to do it. But anyway, I feel like it's one of those sort of. It's just like, all right, we need to put an adult in charge of this thing, and I don't know.
I don't know if we got the right adults. I don't know how you fix this. I don't know how Russia can be successful with the tools that it has and the troops that it has, because training is a huge component of anything. I've spoken with people who say, well, the Russia's problem is they don't have an NCO corps. Well, they do have an NCO corps.
Just not very good.
It's mainly junior NCOs. They have the Starshina, which is kind of like a combination of first sergeant, platoon sergeant. And that's about the closest that I would have been in the Russian army, Starshina. But they don't really, for the most part, they don't have this mid-level E6s and E7s, staff sergeant, sergeant first class, that can pass on knowledge. Because in the Russian army, if you want to be a leader, they encourage you to become an officer. If you want to be a technical professional, you become a warrant officer. So those are really just the two paths. And they were trying to kind of make an NCO corps, but it's this mid-level NCO corps that knows how to do everything. I often say, like, what did I do in the Army? I was the Burger King drive-thru manager. That's what I was. The lieutenant is the manager of the store. Lieutenant's the store manager. Or actually, maybe the captain's the store manager. Lieutenant's the shift manager, and I get to run the drive-thru, right? And if the lieutenant has to leave, then I can run the whole store while he's gone. Right. That's kind of what I did. Right. But without that mid-level NCO knowledge, there's a huge freaking problem because you're not passing on. It's that informal chain of command where all the time I would sit down a new NCO or a new private and be like, all right, let's do some hip pocket training. What do you see here? Or how would you go through this? Or, hey, grab that toe. I want to give a quick block of instruction on how you load this thing. And if you don't have that dad of the platoon around and mom is taking care of everything, that's a big problem. You can think of Russian platoons are a lot like single mothers. Mom is taking care of everything. The lieutenant takes care of everything. And there's really no platoon sergeant that can help out, and be like, all right, we're going to do some training. And I don't know how you fix that without years of training. And if Russia had taken some time, if they had taken a year to do training. Oh, the other issue, one huge problem that their army has, Russia really has no equivalent of miles gear. That's why all of their exercises are
for folks who have no idea what we're talking about. Miles gear is like multiple integrated laser engagement system.
Yeah, laser tag.
Yeah, it's like laser tag for the army. So except you can shoot people out for like kilometers.
Yeah. So miles gear, and you use this as OPFOR. It's a military laser engagement system, and when you fire blanks out of your rifle, a laser emitter that is attached to your rifle fires as well, and people who are wearing a harness can detect hits. So if you're hit, your harness will beep, and you have to take a key out of your own weapon, which deactivates your weapon, put it in your harness, and that turns the harness off. If you ever watched the movie Heartbreak Ridge, the early version of Miles was in that movie. And we have miles for tanks, for Bradleys, and a soldier with a rifle can shoot at a Bradley and it won't affect the Bradley. But if the commander steps out of the Bradley and he has a harness on, it'll affect the commander.
And also on those tanks, there are radio signals that are sent back to a massive display. They call it the Star Wars building at the National Training Center, where you can actually see icons in real time moving across the screen. And when they die, where you're hit, if you're hit in the front, the tank's less likely to die. So there's a lot of things that are involved. The one thing it didn't test, though, for people who were with me at the National Training Center who subsequently deployed, is there are some bad habits that you learn in training like that. And that is, you are not used to the kinetic effects of the weapons that you're firing, right? So if you're in a small village or, where there's buildings and you're shooting at people in the buildings, right, you're going to have the ricochet of like plaster. But again, I'm just relaying. I haven't experienced this, but the kinetic effects are where you don't train for.
Yeah, that's true. But Russia doesn't really have that system because it's expensive. And that's why you see them doing all this Potemkin training where, there's this whole set piece battle where they move forward and they're firing their guns. And that's very good training for visiting dignitaries.
Mm-hmm.
Not so good if you're actually trying to learn tasks and learn where you're failing. So I think just the lack of having miles gear is a huge problem because you can't mentally put yourself in that situation where, this is what it's like when we get flanked, or this is what it's like when I do an attack and I forget to put out near far side security or left right security. So that is a huge problem. And if Russia had trained for maybe a year or two first before entering Ukraine, I don't want to say things would be different. I think things would be harder. I think that maybe they would have gotten to Kyiv and then just face just Molotov cocktails and an insurgency that would have made Iraq look like romper room. Like, these people just do not want to live under Russia. They don't want to live under Russia.
Well, I'm pretty confident the plan was never to seize territory. The plan was to do a decapitation strike. I don't even think the Germans in World War II entered Kyiv. I think they just surrounded it and moved on because it's a massive city. And just going block by block with the combat power that the Russians put into the country is just not.
I think you're right.
Ain't going to work.
Decapitation strike, put in a new leader, and then, free profit, right? Now I have a guy. If you're President Putin, it is terrifying having about NATO. People talk about, they're going to join NATO, and if only they didn't join NATO, we had an agreement that no one would become NATO. Like, number one, every country has a right to enter any treaty they want with any other country. But number two, NATO doesn't randomly just attack countries. Usually there's a reason first, and people have talked about, Russia's now surrounded by NATO. Like, we got nukes in the freaking Barents Sea, 15 minutes away from, we don't need to put nukes in in Ukraine, we can hit you from the ocean right now. So that's kind of a weird argument. I think Putin's fear was that you have this budding democracy. I mean, Ukraine isn't perfect. There's corruption in Ukraine. I've talked with guys who've come back to Ukraine who've been like, dude, that place is jacked up. You know, like I got stolen.
The thing I've heard is only about a third of the money, the $50 billion that we put in that country, actually gets to the front.
I don't know what the number would be. I've talked with guys from the International Legion. I've donated a significant amount of money to this one particular. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't want to get them targeted,
right?
But I've donated through Help Is on the Way UA, which is run by a guy named Johnny Rogers, who's just a dude in a van. And he's able to get that money to the people who need it. But some of the people in the International Legions, they don't necessarily get the equipment that they need. Some do, and some don't. And like I was talking.
Well, there's two branches, right? The one that's controlled by Ukrainian intelligence was the one that had those two Polish mobsters in charge.
Yeah.
And then there was, I think the other one, I haven't heard anything negative about, but that one was like these guys would just send people to their deaths while they would just sit kind of in the back. So you also have to be very specific about which foreign legion you join.
Yeah. So I think I'm supporting the other one.
It sounds like it. You would have heard about it if you didn't, I think.
Yeah. So. Well, actually, a couple of months ago, I actually developed a tool. It's a plastic tool that you could use with an N-law to determine whether you were too close to fire the N-law or not. It was essentially a ranging tool because I've seen people fire the N-law from buildings at tanks and the N-law just bounces off because it hadn't armed properly. And I'm like, this is a physics problem. So if you know the height of the average Soviet era apartment building, it's just a tool. It's literally like a protractor with an arm. And you take a cartridge, a 5.54 cartridge or a 5.45 cartridge, pop it into one as the pivot, and then you set your floor with the other cartridge. So I might be on the third floor, and you just point it at where you want to shoot, and there's a go, no-go gauge. And if it's go, you're good to fire. If it's no-go, you're not good to fire. So I actually 3D printed these things, and we got them over to Ukraine. And actually, we found out later that Ukraine is the 3D printing. What they could really do is laser cut metal. So these things were being used there. But before I did all that, I actually contacted a lawyer, and I told him, I'm like, is it okay if and I talked with the lawyer, and the lawyer's like, well, it's a geometry aid. It's not a weapon. It's not even going on the weapon. It's just an aid to determine geometry.
What about the Logan Amendment? Does that impact that? I
actually haven't heard of that, but my lawyer didn't say anything, so I think I'm okay with that. But
yeah, it doesn't. I think it's basically what, like when Milley called the Chinese, that violated the Logan Amendment.
Yeah, and I think I'm okay with this. It was literally a tool that had an arm that hung down like this, just a tool.
Yeah.
And you go like, all right, turn it like this. All right, well, the arm is pointing to go. The arm is pointing to no go. It did everything that really anybody with a little bit of experience could have done. We actually had another version that you could make out of cardboard for people who are in Mariupol, although, they didn't really need it after it got out. So,
yeah, I couldn't imagine that.
Yeah, that was one day. There's going to be a movie made about that, right? Like that.
I mean, they were all captured, right? Were any of them released through prisoner exchanges? Do you know?
I think some were. I think some also died in that. I had a video about it where Russia said it was a HIMARS strike, but I proved that what Russia really did was lock the doors and throw incendiary grenades into a building full of prisoners from Mariupol, which. Oh, you didn't watch that video? Oh, yeah.
Wait, so they already surrendered and they did that?
In the building. They were in like a barracks. It was like a warehouse. The Russians just put a bunch of beds in there. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, they threw a bunch of incendiaries in the building, let these guys burn, and then said it was a HIMARS strike. HIMARS has at least the M31 has a 200-pound warhead. There wouldn't be a building after that. Like we saw what HIMARS does to a building in that vocational school that was attacked a couple of weeks ago or last week. So when a HIMARS rocket, if it hit like an aluminum frame building, like it just would have been nothing left. That was actually a tough one to get past the YouTube censors because there were like skeletons, I had to like not show the skeletons. That's tough getting past.
Yeah, when I go to post-production and I don't have all the bells and whistles I normally have on these things, it'll be because you scared the crap out of me, right?
It's in a way, like I get it. So it's advertising. So I understand they want to make money, and they make money. I make money when they make money. And the more money I have, the more money I can donate, more money I can put towards production to buy lights or buy cameras or buy this microphone or get on a plane to fly to wherever to cover a story about the 11th Airborne Corps, right? Or the 11th Airborne Division. So I understand why YouTube has the rules they do. The evening news shows a lot worse.
Yeah.
So I don't know why you can't just have a checkbox that says like, hey, this is violence, but it's in a news context. So advertisers that don't want that, there's plenty of companies that would, firearms content gets demonetized in a certain way. Like if you're doing firearms on a range, you're going to have to select that. And then that's when you get ads for holsters or CCW insurance or whatever. Right.
Speaking of arms, so I saw this morning, but I think it was on a Ukrainian website. So it's probably about 50% true.
Okay.
So according to that website, over 100% of all the Russian tanks that entered Ukraine have been destroyed, at least in terms of numbers. I've entered it since the beginning of the invasion, right? So there would have been resupply and things like that. Okay. And something like 45% of tanks in the entire Russian arsenal are gone. I know that's not, well, the 45%.
There's no way of knowing that. That means every single tank that was in the initial invasion has been destroyed or captured.
Well, to be clear, the same number. So if you went in, it's for easy numbers, if you went in with 100 tanks and you resupplied 200 tanks during the course of the invasion, 100 tanks of that mix had been destroyed.
So I have to plug covert cabal for a second here.
Yeah.
These guys did. I will send you the link so you can show it to your subscribers.
So say it again, because I think you got cut off.
Covert cabal.
Covert cabal.
Covert cabal. And I'll send you the link to their specific video where they actually use satellite footage to show Russian tanks disappearing from marshalling yards or from storage yards. And that's proof that there's not enough, and they're taking them and they're either refurbishing them or sending them directly to the front lines. And I think their conclusion was that a third are operational, a third can be refurbished, and a third are only good for parts. So I think they said Russia has about 22,000 tanks. And so that means 22,000. It's a little over 6,000, 7,000 tanks probably are in
been destroyed
working order.
Yeah. A third? Yeah. 7,000 tanks. 7,000.
So Oryx has been great.
7.145 something to be exact. Just so you.
Yeah, Oryx has been great about tracking each individual vehicle that's been destroyed, and they're pretty good at figuring out which vehicles which based on hull numbers and things like that. So I think they said about 2,000 of these things have been destroyed. Everyone keeps saying Russia's running out of equipment, but they've been running out of equipment for the past 6 months.
Right? Although the tanks that they're throwing in are now T-62s for the most part, right?
I have not seen that. Seen that. I think one of the things we're seeing right now is that we're really not seeing the footage that we've seen before, because I think both sides, it's the winter, and fighting in the winter is hard. There was a video just a couple of days ago I saw, and I was going to do a video on it, but I can't do a video on everything. This one guy, he was wearing women's boots, because maybe it was just the best
And not because he had a fetish, but because
I don't
that's probably
think
all
so.
they had.
I have
Right.
to ask, because he just needed warm boots, and maybe his feet were just smaller than normal, or a woman donated them. I don't know. But he was wearing women's boots. I joined the military in 1994. And I recall when we started going into Iraq, and not everybody had armor. Afghanistan wasn't a problem. It was Iraq. Not everybody had hard body armor, the interceptor armor. And that would turn into a huge scandal because people were buying their own armor, the dragon skin armor. You remember the controversy with the dragon skin armor? People are buying their own stuff. Are they allowed to wear dragon skin armor? Are they not allowed to wear dragon skin armor? People make fun of the Russian tanks with the cages on top. I don't know if they ever saw footage of us in Iraq welding, welding scrap to our Humvees, putting sandbags on the floor. War is hard. And so we had supply problems too. We definitely had supply problems. Not everybody getting the right armor, not having armor kits for Humvees. I can't make fun of the Russians for that. They're just trying to do what they need to do. But,
well, yeah, I don't want to make fun of any side. I just want to try to be objective, because individual Russian soldier, they're just kind of thrown into this thing. Now, the ones who commit atrocities, they deserve all the scorn and death that they experience. But same thing on the Ukrainian side. If they're committing atrocities, which I would be surprised if they weren't in some instances, but they're very good at locking down anything that's negative. But I haven't heard anything.
So one of the things that they're kind of operating under is that I think everybody knows that NATO will support Ukraine as long as it's politically expedient. The millisecond it's not politically expedient, you're done. I mean, you look at Afghanistan. It was no longer politically expedient. All right, well.
By the way, I think the execution on that withdrawal there is the reason Ukraine is fighting for its life right now.
Really? Well, what's your theory on that?
There's no doubt in my mind that went into Putin's calculation, where he saw that happen, and he's just like, oh, the American people aren't going to be willing to risk the lives of American soldiers for Ukraine, particularly after this big debacle. Not only that, the U.S. military is not as competent as it had shown itself to be in all the times prior. And I think his miscalculation was the botching of that withdrawal was not a military failure. It was a political failure, right? In terms of which resources to close. Like, why would you keep Kabul? Why would that be the last airport to close? Like, wouldn't you keep Bagram for as long as possible because it's isolated? And the rationale was, I believe the reason is, and folks can comment below if I'm wrong, but my theory around that is it was just like, no, we have to have this many troops. You can't have that many troops. You need 6,000. I'm making numbers up, but you need 6,000 troops in order to have Bagram, but you only need 3,000 with Kabul. So just do it. And I believe the commander in the region of U.S. forces resigned the summer before that happened, because he saw politicians and political appointees making, I was going to use a word that probably would have gotten me demonetized, so like differently abled decisions. Right? Like, it's just, anyway, you'll get me on a go. I'll take us way off track. But
regarding that, maybe. That's a tough one.
I'm not saying that was like I'm not saying that was the decisive reason in his calculus, but that was one input into his political calculus about gauging U.S. response.
I talked with guys from the 82nd who were at the Kabul airport, and I don't know, I didn't get the sense that they were unwilling to fight at all. Like, if
no, I'm not saying that at all.
What right?
Yeah. What I'm saying is it was not a military failure. It was the choices that the politicians imposed on the military, like at the strategic or at the operational level, right? So which airport to close, which, like Kabul. I mean, imagine yourself in the 82nd Airborne. You had to defend that thing with a massive population center. Everything's bunched in. Like, that's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. Like, why would you allow, if you were a competent general, why would you allow someone at the political level to put your troops in that level of harm when the obvious decision for somebody who doesn't even have any operational experience would be, let's withdraw from this nice, well-protected, isolated part of Afghanistan so that we can make this seamless kind of exit. And that's not what happened. But to the guys, I know people who watch this are off to double check, but my understanding is that the commander had resigned before all this happened because he saw it coming. It's not like we didn't see this coming, right? You can't just say, in 5 days you're out. Good luck, right? So anyway, that I think Putin just took that as an input, just saying in terms of the U.S. is not going to have the will to do anything about this because just the way it looked, the way it played out, it was just a disaster. And it wasn't a military disaster. It was just a political. And look, I'm not saying we shouldn't have withdrawn from Afghanistan. I'm saying the way that we did it was of staggering incompetence. So,
yeah, it probably could have been handled better. I'll admit that.
Yeah, like I said, but I like one choice. You just choose the. When I heard Kabul was the last airport open, I'm like, what the F? Like, who made that decision? Like,
the only thing I can think of is that I don't know. There had to have been a reason. But you know what? I'm just an E7, man. I don't.
I honestly, I think it was like troop levels. I think it was just like we need more troops to defend Bagram, and we need to be at it like some diplomat negotiated some force level with the Taliban that they had to hit.
The other thing could just be that we were just hoping that things would work out up until the end, because like I said, like when things go wrong, they go wrong real fast.
Ryan, hope is a political word. It's not a military word. Right.
Yeah, the collapse was so rapid. It's absolutely insane how fast that collapse happened.
But were you surprised by it? I wasn't surprised at all.
I think so. I was never in Afghanistan, but I knew a lot of people who were. There were some Afghans who wanted us there. There were some Afghans who wanted to try to make a better country. There were some Afghans who were in the army because it was a paycheck. I don't know. Was I surprised? I think I thought it would take longer than it did. And I thought they had a fighting chance because speaking to Iraqis, like every Iraqi policeman or IA, Iraqi army, or the marshals, every single one of them hated Saddam. They hated the foreigners that were in their country causing trouble because for the most part, it wasn't Iraqis that were killing Americans. It was
Syrians and
it was Syrians, Chechens.
By the way, in Afghanistan too. Well, not just mostly, but Chechens and Uyghurs in Afghanistan.
I heard that Chechens, every time a Chechen would try to go to Afghanistan, they would get killed by the Afghans because they're like, we don't want you here either, you know. But I mean, maybe that's just soldiers being flippant, right?
Well, my friends I had said that they never found a living Chechen. They would always find these redheaded bodies.
Yeah.
Because I mean, look,
probably killed by the Afghans. They just want to be left alone.
Or the Chechens have a reputation too, for just tenaciousness.
But the Chechens, so one of the interesting things about the Russian army was that in Russia, for the longest time, you tried to avoid military service because then you were going to get drafted. You're going to have to go through China. That was not a fun experience. The rule of the grandfathers where you get hazed. You could be sent to some but Chechens in the Caucasus, anyone who comes to the Caucasus, like military service is considered a point of pride. Like that's your manhood. So Chechens volunteered. And it's one of the reasons I think the Russian army just got their butts handed to them in Grozny because the Chechens were like, oh, come into my den so the spiders will fly, right?
Until they leveled it. Right? Until
I wrote a paper about that for the Army. God, back in the early 2000s. Yeah, they had literally Russia had to go block by block. I think it's probably what we would have saw in Kyiv. And if the Russians had the training, it would have taken months.
Well, not only that, I'm going to get into a little bit. I guess I could talk about it. I just won't show images of it. But when the Russians would come into Grozny in the morning, they would have to pass through these stakes with the heads of Russian soldiers on them.
I wasn't aware of that.
The Chechens also would aim at the groin, right? And the reason is A, it's humiliating and demoralizing, but B, it's also it doesn't kill you, but it just sends you back with a crippling injury. The other thing they would do is in the buildings, they would hang out the live and dead bodies of Russian soldiers so that the Russians would have to shoot their own to get at the Chechens. So they are ruthless soldiers.
I haven't heard that. I interviewed a couple of Russian soldiers for this paper back in the early 2000s. And one of them, he was telling me how he got off of, like, they basically, in a way it's kind of funny, but essentially they put him in a train. And almost like the scene from Me at the Gates, although there are problems with that movie's accuracy. They basically put all these soldiers in a train and they let them out, and there was no officer on the train with them. And so these conscripts are wandering around, and this old Chechen woman came up to them and started yelling at them, why are you here? Go home. And the guy's like, I don't even know where I am.
Oh, yeah, when they first invaded, because they didn't even know they were invading.
Where they're going, they didn't tell them what they were supposed to be doing. And this woman's yelling at him, and he's like, I don't know where I am. But he also said that, and this struck like, oh my God, you had baker units? So one of the things he told me was that his officers said that everyone was going to get an extra 1,000 calories a day because they had to fight in the cold. And they actually had baking units. Like, that's your MOS, you're a baker, or your military occupational specialty. Your job is baker. They actually had these field kitchen baking units that were baking, but they couldn't get the bread to the front line. And so the bread was just getting thrown out. Such a waste, and just the thought that you have, actually the idea of fresh bread sounds great. But I've had Russian bread before, and it's crazy. Like, the first day, it's amazing. And the day later, because there's no preservatives, you could use it as a hammer. Like, it's hard as a rock. And I even remember, I was a kid, my friend Charlie, his brother was an embassy Marine, and he was stationed in Russia. And I remember it was like 1984, and I was in the 4th grade. And Charlie, I was at my friend's house, and his brother called home, from Russia. That was a big deal back then. Like, the cell phone, you had landline, long distance, and all that. And I remember, can I talk to your brother? And I was like, hey, are the Russians a threat? And he's like, threat? They can't even make milk. Apparently, like, all of their milk, and this is in 1984, like, all of their milk had to be trucked in from West Germany. All the milk at the embassy had to be trucked in from West Germany because, I guess, Russian milk wasn't pasteurized, and the embassy said no Marines could drink the milk. So that's just like, wow. I've often said, like, what makes America great, what makes our Army powerful is not our Patriot missiles and our M1 tanks. It's our logistics. Mm-hmm. I was in Egypt, and I remember I was a site commander of this little COP, this combat outpost, and we were on the border between Egypt and Israel, and our job was to make sure that the peace treaty was being enforced between the two countries.
Were you in the 101st Airborne when this?
No. I remember that when that happened, though, when that plane crashed. But no, this has been a rotation mission. It's called the MFO, Multinational Force and Observers. There were I think at the time, 13 or 17 different nations, like Norway is part of the MFO, Japan is part of the MFO, Colombia, Uruguay, Fiji. The New Zealanders are part of the MFO, and their job was to go to each site periodically and just do these snap inspections. And at each site, we had a kitchen and a cook. It was a military cook, and you would order food, and the cook would cook the food. And so I got swole there. I was jacked. I had a picture. It was all you had to do.
Wow.
I'm a runner, but there was really no place to run unless it was around the wire. So we just ate meat and lifted weights, like it was, I just spent 6 months getting like this. And then I came home and was like, like deflated, right? So I remember I was a site commander, and we noticed that the previous rotation had left some chicken patties in our freezer, and they were about to expire. And well, if the New Zealanders caught you with expired food, that could be a demerit, and you could lose your site. They had to do something, right? Like it was, it would also count your ammunition and, stuff. Is it clean? Are you raking for sand fleas? So I remember I was saying to the cook, like, well, let's just cook it all. And I remember for like 2 days straight, we had chicken patties for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And after like the third day, I was like, dude, I'm sick of these chicken patties. I'm going to give them to the Egyptians. Across the street, and this is like middle of nowhere, there's our COP, and then right across the street, there's like this Egyptian border guard building. And I remember I on the kind of met a big shwaya, and these guys could speak a little English. And so I got the chicken patties, put them in a bag, and walked across the street. And I was talking with the guys, and I told them, like, yeah, this is chicken. They wanted to make sure it wasn't pork. I'm like, no, it's chicken. Mm-hmm. And they were so happy because every day the Egyptian first sergeant would stop by in the morning in a van and drop off a bag of rice and vegetables. And that was your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Yeah, they had a 55-gallon drum that they would fill up periodically with water. Every week, I think, with water. And they had like this old black and white TV with like a coat hanger as an antenna as their entertainment. Meanwhile, back on our site, we had satellite TV, 2 different kinds of satellite TV. Some, not all, but some of our buildings are air conditioned, like our talk was air conditioned. We had a day room that was air conditioned. We had like movies, like on DVD and VHS. We had a VHS player, DVD player. We had an Xbox, like a first generation Xbox. Like we had all this stuff. And, I gave the chicken patties to them, and they kind of told me that they only got meat when they rotated back to their main base. And even then, it was what they called, I guess, what they called army meat. So, like, that's kind of how I took their translation, army meat, which I guess was meat that had been rejected by their equivalent of the USDA.
Oh, that's nice.
So Egypt, if your meat
only the best
rejected for public sale because it's tainted or it's whatever, you can still sell it to the army. So we had more chicken patties than we could possibly eat halfway across the world. And the Egyptians couldn't even feed their own people in their own country.
That's logistics.
Like,
all right, one last question, because we're going way over long, and then we got to continue the discussion. So you're the Russians. Well, actually, no, I'll save that for the next one. Ukrainian manpower, actually, it's not manpower anymore, but just soldiers to fight this thing. We don't hear anything about it in the media. I'm hearing informally that whatever collection method people use to hear low-level radio transmissions and things like that, they're hearing an increase in Polish language, French, and British English. Mm-hmm. So what I think may be happening, and again, I have not dived into this issue and really done the analysis, and I don't think it's any mystery, but I think the Ukrainians are getting dangerously low on manpower right now. Mm-hmm. And I think they're using, Polish, third party, either mercenaries or elements of the Polish military are informally involved. So again, I haven't seen any of this stuff on the internet, so I don't know how true it is, but what are your thoughts on Ukrainian military strength right now?
I don't know. From the people on the ground that I've talked to, it doesn't seem like it's that much of an issue, but most of the people that I talk to can only see out 300 yards, right? They don't have the big picture. Ukraine can raise an army of about 1 million people if they use women. Mm-hmm. Russia will always have a manpower advantage.
It's like 3-1. It's
a lot of those people are not going to want to fight, or they'll get into situations where they'll try to avoid fighting if they can. The Polish thing, that's a tough one, because I would assume that anybody fighting would be using encrypted frequency hopping radios. So you're not going to know whether you're hearing Polish or not. So that's
some of it could be the International Legion, right?
I can tell you, I've said before, I think the only reason that the U.S. is in Poland is to prevent the Poles from going north and kicking Russia's ass. The Poles are not to be messed with. Like these, I know a number of them. They're on my Discord channel. And I was surprised at the rate of gun ownership in Poland, number one. But number two, it's almost like in Poland, it's fashionable to be part of the National Guard now, or their equivalent of the National Guard, their territorial army. Like it's a thing. Like it's cool now to be in the military. And I can definitely see some people who are like, let's head over there. Let's get ours in, Let me get in on that comment.
Keep that comment in your head about it's fashionable to be in the military, because I have something to add in the next episode.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, my friend, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much, Sean.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.